What is going on, everyone? Welcome to the finale of my summer deep dive series. It's been a lot getting this series done, but definitely, I think the biggest endeavor I've done on this channel, but it was all worth it. Thanks to you guys. Thank you for all of your support for the series. Excited today to break down the Kansas City Chiefs that have given us a little bit more to talk about here as Chris Jones continues to hold out and Travis Kelce got injured yesterday, losing track of time these days. But we get to break down this team here today, and then we get to watch them play football tomorrow. Football season is here. I do want to remind you guys, I'll have my full predictions show tomorrow with record predictions, Super Bowl prediction, awards show, you name it. Football season's here, baby. Let's have some fun here today, though. Our last day without NFL football. For this deep dive here, as always, we're going to start with the off-season recap, where we're going to go position by position, where they got better, worse, or stayed neutral. And for the Chiefs, with the coaching staff is where we're going to start. And it is slightly downgraded. They are going to lose Eric Bieniemy this season, who's been in Kansas City for years at this point. Kind of waiting on a head coach opportunity, hopefully, but he's going to head to Washington to kind of show what he can bring to the table outside of Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And we're going to have to wait and see kind of what sort of impact this has on the Chiefs offense. By my understanding is he brought a lot of the creativity in, third downs and in the red zone, some of those really funky, almost gimmicky plays that they run, where Mahomes is doing a, underhand softball toss, the motions and all that stuff. I don't think we see less of that necessarily. I still think Andy Reid brings a lot to the table there. I think Matt Nagy's having fun as the offensive coordinator here. I think Mahomes brings a lot of those ideas to the table. So I'm not really worried about it, but that is a big name offensive coordinator that they're losing in Eric Bieniemy. But as far as the roster is concerned, quarterback gonna stay neutral. They're swapping backups, bringing in Blaine Gabbert. Running back, they are also gonna stay neutral. No change there. Tight end, neutral. They did lose Jody Fortson to a season-ending injury. Was kind of a developmental tight end for them. Kind of a, dang it, Jody Fortson got hurt moment when that news came out, but ultimately not gonna have a huge impact on their season. I know Kelce got hurt too, but seems relatively minor, even though the short notice circumstances might cause him to miss a game here. But then at wide receiver, I do have this as downgraded, though they have a lot of pieces that they're hoping to step up here. But they lost Juju Smith-Schuster, who was their number one wide receiver last year, and Mecole Hardman heads to the Jets. Hardman didn't play a ton last year, but was effective when he did. But they do have a lot of bodies that they're hoping to step up. Kadarius Toney, I'm going to list as an addition there between being a midseason addition and missing some time. He only played 10% of their total snaps last year, so they're hoping, even if he is an injury risk player, that they can get more than 10% of their snaps from him this year. They bring in Rashee Rice in the second round. They bring in Richie James via free agency, and Justin Ross made the team this time around. Definitely a fascinating wide receiver room that we'll get to break down here in the roster portion of the video. But then on the offensive line, a ton of movement here, most notably really swapping tackles, letting Orlando Brown leave in free agency and bringing in Jawan Taylor from Jacksonville. Relatively close to a push there. And then their other starting tackle, Andrew Wiley, heads to Washington with Eric Bieniemy. And they have like three other pieces that are new to the team for this year. Donovan Smith, who's been Tom Brady's left tackle for a few years. They draft Wanya Morris in the third round, and they get Lucas Niang back fully healthy this year. So between the three of those, I think that can compensate for Andrew Wiley as well. I don't necessarily see this as an offensive line upgrade, more just sustaining what was already a good group there. Then you look at the defense, and not a ton of like sweeping changes here, but there is some movement. So on the interior defensive line, Colin Sanders signed with New Orleans. They bring in a couple of low-level options. Neil Farrell They traded from the Raiders, and then they draft the big-bodied Keandre Coburn out of Texas in the 6th round. So I've got that as slightly downgraded, just going from some more proven, adequate talent to unproven talent. But of course, the big question here is going to be Chris Jones. We're going to have an extended conversation about what they'd be with him, what they'd be without him. He is a massive wild card for this team at this point with his holdout situation and kind of how that all plays out. And if they don't have Chris Jones this year, that's one of the biggest downgrades that any team will have witnessed with a position group on the interior defensive line. But then on the edge, this one's tough to get a true read on as far as whether they got better or worse. I am ultimately just going to leave it as neutral. A couple of kind of average veterans are no longer here, Frank Clark and Carlos Dunlap. Solid enough players, though more names than stars at this point. But the additions are a little bit more high variance, I suppose. Charles Omenihu was a nice free agent signing, but he proceeded to get suspended for 6 games after the signing. And then they spent a first-round pick on Felix Anaduke Uzama, so some unproven talent there. In theory, that room could be upgraded, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see there. They also bring in the developmental B.J. Thompson in the 5th round. So again, leaving edge as neutral, though there's a world where that could go in either direction this year. Linebacker, I have it just as slightly upgraded. They did sign Drew Tranquill, who I think is a really solid player. Don't know how much he's going to play, but nice depth nonetheless. At cornerback, leaving this one as neutral, just bringing in really a couple of day 3 picks in a way. They drafted Nick Jones in the 7th round, and then they kind of poached Darius Rush, who didn't make the Indianapolis Colts' roster. And yeah, they pick him up. Neither expected to play, though, so we're keeping that neutral. Then with the safety room, I've got this as slightly downgraded. Juan Thornhill had a career year last year, got a nice size contract from the Browns. That is a loss, but I do like the signing of Mike Edwards for what it's worth, and they draft Shamari Connor in the 4th round. So I think they're equipped to sustain that loss, but it is going to open up a slight question with that number 2 safety spot in the secondary. And then kicker punter is going to stay the same. So kind of a busy offseason for a defending Super Bowl champion. Nothing too crazy, but it does open up some variance, especially when you look at that defensive line and maybe the wide receiver group. But we're going to get into all of these position groups in depth shortly, but first I want to talk a little bit more about this coaching staff and what this team looks like schematically on both sides of the ball. And this Chiefs team is very well documented at this point for their coaching staff and what they like to do. But Andy Reid, obviously, as the head coach, I rank as the 2nd best head coach in the NFL, just behind Kyle Shanahan. And when it comes to assigning rankings for the Chiefs with their coaching and team culture, it's obviously very high. They're tier 1 for team culture. You win 2 out of 3 Super Bowls, you're going to earn a lot of benefit of the doubt. And that's basically what that team culture ranking is for this series, is sort of my benefit of the doubt slider, if you will. But pass game coaching, I have them tier 1, where Andy Reid has shown over time to be a true genius in the designed passing game, the designed drop-back passing game. Run game coaching, however, just tier 3, which is more middle of the league. I really have never felt like the Chiefs are all that efficient in their run game, and I don't know that they do a ton of creative things to mix things up there. So I even though Andy Reid is incredible, I didn't want to be ingenuine to, this team's run game, where they're well coached, but I wouldn't rave about the Chiefs' run design like I do for some other teams. But obviously, Andy Reid overall is one of the best offensive minds in the league, and his kind of modern pro spread offense has also in part taken over the league. There's really, when you really break it down, there's basically three stems of schemes in the NFL. You've got the Shanahan branch, you've got kind of the remnants of any sort of pro style teams, which there's only a few of those these days. And then everybody else is pretty much in some deviation of the Andy Reid offense, which is a ton of shotgun, spread West Coast concepts, using oftentimes the threat of RPOs and bubble screens to kind of be an extension of the run game out of the shotgun. And then obviously some of those more spread formations where it's 2x2, or another thing you see a lot of the times is that trips left with 3 wide receivers and then using that kind of athletic receiving tight end in the Kelsey mold. Another example would be kind of how the Jaguars with Doug Peterson, who is an Andy Reid disciple, use a guy like Evan Ingram, where they take that guy and kind of isolate him on one side and provide some frustrating personnel decisions for the opposing defense. And you know, those are some of the core concepts of Andy Reid's offense, and those are going to be in full force yet again this season. As far as the run game, it's a lot of inside zone, but you can mix in trap and counter, draw out of shotgun as well. Now, they do have Matt Nagy as the sort of new offensive coordinator. You know, I'm fascinated to see what sort of job he does here. He's obviously a well-credentialed coach. He went to go be the head coach of the Chicago Bears and had to work with Mitchell Trubisky. Partial fault of his own there. I think he had a voice in drafting Trubisky that ultimately led to his demise in Chicago. But I still think he's a good offensive mind, and as an offensive coordinator under Andy Reid, you know, maybe there is a world where he gets a second opportunity or something. I don't know. I think that's still a few years away, but, you know, good for him for climbing back up, getting the OC title, and I think he's going to, help supplement that loss of Eric Bieniemy to a decent degree. Now, part of what makes the Chiefs such a special team and helps lead to them being my number one team in my power rankings is they don't just have this incredible culture under Andy Reid and this great offensive coaching, but they also have some of the best defensive coaching in the league in Steve Spagnuolo, which is like a perfect marriage here because, you know, Spags he's been a head coach, he's been around the league, he's been here forever. Almost like 30 years of NFL experience. He's not getting a head coach offer somewhere. He'd be pretty far down the list, especially as a defensive mind, to be a candidate to leave Kansas City in the way that like Eric Bieniemy just did. It's really perfect. They get a great defensive mind and they get continuity on that side of the ball, which really helps them, you know, just kind of build up the culture on that side of the ball and keep having like this memory bank of information they can recall like 2 or 3 years ago when they saw something similar and say, hey, remember that adjustment we made 2 years ago? Let's do that again here. And that continuity really matters, especially when you get into January football. And speaking of which, that's another huge credit to Steve Spagnuolo, is that when this team gets into those meaningful games late in the season, few teams play as hard and as fast as the Kansas City Chiefs. And I think he does get the absolute most out of the roster here, because when you have a guy like Mahomes, it is difficult to put a dominant championship caliber defensive roster in front of you. You've got to, you know, develop young players and get the most out of replacement level guys. And he's done about as good of a job as that as anyone. As far as what his scheme looks like, it is, in a sense, a traditional. I just hate using 4-3 and 3-4 nowadays because you just don't really see those fronts anymore. But that is how we're kind of catered to talk in terms of it being a 4-man front with 4 players with their hand in the dirt. But it's a 4-2 bump and run system. They would love to run man coverage as much as anyone in the league, but obviously, everybody at some point has to run zone, and they're good at varying their zones. They'll go quarters, cover 3, cover 2. They can get into those kind of cover 3 fire zones. They can go zero blitz. They're a very adaptable defense. And, you know, Spags, he just, kind of like I said earlier, he's got this memory bank of information. There's really nothing you can throw at him that he doesn't know how to adapt to. And there's not really a roster that he couldn't build some kind of a competent game plan around. So he's a big asset for this Chiefs team as well. This is definitely, you know, between this and San Francisco, those are your 2 best coaching staffs in the league. So the Chiefs obviously in good hands from top down there. Now, before we get into the roster breakdown, got to tell you guys about today's sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. The NFL season's here, man. Chiefs fans, we're going to be watching the game here on Thursday night, and no better way to uptick your interest in tomorrow night's game or any NFL game this season than participating in Underdog's weekly pick'em contests. So much fun. You guys have all seen the screenshots of people putting these lineups together where you're selecting player stats higher or lower. And if you hit on all your picks doing a 5-pick slip, you get 20 times your money. But you don't have to do 5. You can do 2 or 3. You can do 4 and buy insurance so that only 3 have to hit. There's so many different ways to play on Underdog. It's not too late to participate in best ball drafts too. And Underdog even has a bonus right now where they'll match up to $100 on your first deposit if you use promo code TFG, and you get an extra free pick for your first pick'em contest, assuming Patrick Mahomes can get 1 passing yard, which even if Travis Kelce is hurt, I think he can accomplish that against the Lions defense. So no better time to sign up for Underdog Fantasy than right now. You'll support my channel in a big way as well. Underdog's been incredible to work with, so you can show your support back to them as well. Again, you'll get $100 on your first deposit if you sign up using promo code TFG today. But let's now get into the roster. We're going to rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league, and we're going to start with the quarterback position, which this is why the Chiefs are number 1, right? Patrick Mahomes, at this point, far and away the best quarterback in the NFL, getting that beautiful 99 player grade from me there. He really is kind of entering God mode. I mean, we know the traits and the unreal throws and the play extension have always been there, but this recent evolution in his game, I think, has, in my mind, honestly, like I'm not even really afraid to say it because I just believe it to be true because I trust my eyeballs. Like, I believe that he is the best quarterback that's ever played football at this point. You want, career greatness and all that stuff, he's building up towards that. But in terms of, you're asking me what quarterback of all time do I want to play quarterback for my team? It's Patrick Mahomes. And the evolution I'm talking about over the last couple years is, really the league at large made this sweeping defensive change to try and stop this guy. They get into quarters defenses and 2-shell coverages and trying to prevent big plays and all this stuff. And all the Chiefs have done since that is zig when the rest of the league zagged, and they say, okay, well, you're going to take away the big play. Fine, we'll trade away Tyreek Hill, and we're just going to let Patrick Mahomes show that he doesn't have to beat you just through these big explosive plays. He can pick defenses apart. He can have a 13-play drive, taking what's there, taking the underneath stuff, beating you with his mind just as much as his arm. And that's why, in the last couple playoff runs, he's been banged up and still played at an elite level, playing on a bum ankle in that Super Bowl, and still, picking teams apart in that Bengals game. Like, he really has reached that God mode level of quarterback, up there and probably above what we've ever seen at the position. And that's why, Kelce goes down for a week. Chris Jones might not play against one of the most hyped up teams in the NFL for the NFL opener. They're still 5-point favorites at home against Detroit because of this guy right here. Like, as long as you have Patrick Mahomes, you're going to be in a position to compete for a Super Bowl. Now, even though he always gives you a chance, you still want to do the best you can to make that chance as large as possible every year, and that means putting a good team around him. And they've done that. This is still a very good team, despite some of the recent news of guys like Chris Jones and Travis Kelce. But let's break down the rest of this roster, starting with the weaponry. And I've got them 19th in weaponry. Obviously, that's all going to start with Travis Kelce. I'm not too worried about the knee. He's probably not going to play here in the Thursday night game, but hyperextension, I think they'll be safe with it and, make sure he doesn't have any long-term damage there. But, he's been an incredibly durable player throughout his career, and I think he's going to be back just fine here, whether it's next week or in a couple weeks, and it's not going to impact their season all that much. But the mind melt that Mahomes and Kelsey have together is truly remarkable. I don't remember a sort of quarterback receiver chemistry that was at the level of these two guys. And it what it boils down to is mainly two things. Number one is when they get zone coverage, it's basically knowing exactly where the receiver needs to go and where the ball needs to go. It's almost like there's not even a route. It's like you're running a stop route, go find the open spot, and Mahomes will see it, Kelsey will see it. They're reading it all out together, and that's obviously like just mind-blowingly frustrating for a defensive coordinator to stop, because any sort of zone call they're going to have an answer for. And then the other side of things is the play extension, which an underrated aspect of just scramble drill and quarterback's ability to have these crazy throws on the move is having receivers that can also read out the field just as the quarterback does in those situations to find the open space in the defense and oftentimes to work back to the quarterback. And Kelsey is as good as anybody in that. So you pair that with a guy that's already really athletic, a great route runner, catches everything, a full-size tight end, and you end up with this just legendary combination, genuinely one of the best quarterback receiver combos in the NFL. And I don't really care that he's listed as a tight end. He's going to be their leading receiver. He's going to get the most targets on this team. He's the guy that's going to demand double teams and force opposing defenses to account for. Now, after him, I am a little bit worried that there's going to be some matchups where if they do double Kelsey, or even like tomorrow, Thursday night, if Kelsey's hurt, what do the rest of these guys look like? And Mahomes able to elevate this group, but there's only so much Patrick Mahomes can do. And they're going to need these guys to step up. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is just such a role-specific player. He's a true deep threat, and he's good in that role. Ideally, he'd be like a third option in a passing game where he's running posts, he's running, deep fades, deep benders, that kind of stuff. And with his speed, he is able to pull away from defensive backs, and then you hope he can catch the football. He's got some of the worst ball skills, though, of probably any starting receiver in the NFL, both in terms of drops and just contested catch ability. He's genuinely like the least instinctive receiver in terms of winning at the catch point when there's any sort of contact. It's actually remarkable how borderline useless he can be in those situations at times. So you really only want to throw it to him when he's burning guys open. He's practical in the short game because teams are afraid of his deep speed. He can work underneath a little bit. He has cleaned up his hands slightly to the point where he's a more consistent option. But, he is what he is. He's MVS. You need some of these other guys to step up in different roles. And they're hoping Sky Moore can really do that this year. It was a second-round pick last year. Definitely falls into that more slot archetype. Drew a lot of comparisons, though, to a guy like maybe Deontay Johnson. I always felt like Deontay Johnson was a better athlete and a better route runner. But, a similar concept where in the short to intermediate game, they're hoping he can really put together a good skill set to be an early separator, and they're still going to see a ton of quarters coverages. Even if Mahomes has kind of adapted and shown that he can beat you against quarters, teams have still, to this point, elected to say, we'd rather you beat us on 13 plays in a drive than on 3, like you're capable of. And for that reason, there's more space to work underneath. And I think Sky Moore is really going to be the beneficiary of that. And if you are making underdog slips for Thursday night football, load up Sky Moore if Travis Kelce ends up not playing, because I think he is going to see a ton of targets. I think he's going to end up this team's second leading receiver. I believe in the talent. I don't think he's ever going to be a superstar or anything like that, but the skill set, scheme fit, and opportunity is all there, and I think things are going to work out for him this year. So you'll have MVS running deep, keeping the top off the defense. Sky Moore is going to work the short to intermediate game. He doesn't really have great speed, by the way, to ever be, like a Brandon Cooks type of undersized deep threat. I really do see him as almost like a poor man's Amon-Ra St. Brown in a lot of ways. But then they have this sort of gadget role in this offense, the jet sweep guy, the RPO guy, the designated touch guy. And they would love for Kadarius Toney to stay healthy and kind of put it all together off the field. But at this point with Toney, it's very much, for me at least, I'll believe it when I see it, and show me. I needed the extra year at Florida, had some flaws in his game. The Giants gave up on him rather quickly. Comes to Kansas City, everybody's hyping him up. And, injuries is really what it boils down to. Like, he is the perfect example of availability is the best ability. And that term can be overused at times, but it really applies here. I mean, there's no denying the talent. He can run routes, and especially once they get the ball in his hands, there's few players in the NFL as explosive as Kadarius Toney. But how often is he going to be available for this team? And he's already been getting banged up in the preseason. So that's why they have Richie James here. He's just a less explosive but much more reliable version of that player. He is shifty. He can do a lot of the stuff that Kadarius Toney does. And, when Toney isn't available for them, they can just utilize Richie James. And I would be pretty willing to bet that Richie James ends up more productive than Kadarius Toney this year just because of the health. So they're kind of going with a wide receiver by committee, where they're just kind of targeting different skill sets and are going to try to utilize them in a way that caters to those strengths. But what they are kind of missing in the guys that we've talked about so far is more of that X wide receiver, someone that can work the sidelines, kind of be what Juju Smith-Schuster was for them a lot of the times last year. Although I know Juju played a decent amount in the slot as well. But that's kind of exactly why they draft Rashee Rice. I was not a Rashee Rice fan. He was getting a lot of hype early. I pushed back very quickly on that hype, pointing out his deficiencies in his release at the line of scrimmage, where he is one of the worst receivers I've ever seen at getting off of press coverage. He's got clunky feet and just poor technique to do so, but also just his routes are clunky and stiff, and he just doesn't create a lot of separation. He reminds me a scary amount of N'Keal Harry coming out of Arizona State. And that's why I had a kind of day 3 grade on Rashee Rice. And then he ends up going in the second round, which I thought was way too high, but he goes in the second round to the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, it does also remind me of N'Keal Harry in the same way that I didn't like the player, but when he went to get to go play with Tom Brady, I was like, oh, he's going to work out now and make me look like an idiot. No, it turns out like the evaluation was correct, and at some point you got to be able to run routes and separate at the NFL level. So I do have legitimate concerns about Rashee Rice, but I will say the fit does make sense if they see him like they used Juju last year, where he's going to be able to play from the slot at times, provide some mismatches as a bigger bodied guy on slot corners, but also a guy that can win contested catches on the outside, stick routes, comebackers. For what it's worth with Rashee Rice, the best thing I liked about him was his ability to work the sidelines, specifically in scramble drill. He has great instincts at working the sidelines, kind of oftentimes shoving defensive backs off of him. And, I think that could help him succeed here, because Mahomes obviously is the best in the league in those situations. He's also good at separating, specifically only on deep benders, those kind of 15-yard crossing routes from the slot as well. And that's another way that they use Juju to separate. So the skill set really is there. I think he will get mixed in, especially if and when Toney is unavailable. But he is definitely an imperfect player. And, Juju is kind of capped out as a good kind of possession receiver. I still think that's kind of the upside on Rashee Rice. But I'm definitely open to the idea that, in time he could turn into a solid player and kind of be a better player than what my draft grade ultimately was on him, because you couldn't have gone to a better spot. Now, would I have preferred they ended up with a Cedric Tillman or various other options in this draft, and would I be more excited about other players? Yeah, sure, but maybe they can make this work, I guess. Now, they do still have Justin Watson, who's played a little bit. Hands have been up and down for him, but he's a good athlete, a solid separator. I wasn't surprised to see him make the team just because he's familiar with the offense, and there's a lot of kind of new pieces here. But then Justin Ross did make the team. All of the hype on Justin Ross pays off. Now, he is an interesting player in the sense that we've already talked about how this team is looking for that X wide receiver. I definitely think there's a world where he's a better player than Rashee Rice. I mean, Justin Ross at a point in time was like, he might be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft when he was playing at Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, and he was a highly recruited guy, was ultra explosive, young in his career. Reminded me a ton of AJ Green back in his physical prime. With Ross back in like his freshman year, but ridiculous levels of lower body injuries have just completely derailed his career. Ended up going undrafted. More injuries showed up last year. He did get hurt again in camp, but was able to get back. It seems the sort of work ethic and football intelligence that helped him as well be such a capable player earlier in his college career have helped him get his career at least somewhat headed in the right direction. He's a big-bodied receiver. I trust his hands. I trust his field awareness. What I don't trust is the athleticism. I have not seen him look the same since before the injuries. And even when he came back at Clemson in his final year, he just was not that good. He could not really separate. We've already discussed how those things can hold guys like N'Keal Harry, guys like Rashee Rice back at times. And I don't really anticipate that stuff coming to the point where he becomes an AJ Green. But could he be a Devontae Parker or even like maybe a slower version of Gabe Davis or like an Allen Lazard, like something like that as a starting option, a big-bodied option on the outside for this team? Yeah, I could definitely see it. So I'm fascinated. I think the opportunity is there. Definitely pulling for the guy. And then you've got your receiving backs. They really have 3 options here. Isaiah Pacheco, super explosive dude. He showed, strong, firm hands. He's a reliable option in the receiving game. Good with the ball in his hands in space. Good on screens. A lot of speed there. You got Jerick McKinnon, who is really efficient when he plays, a guy that just has not been able to handle a full workload. But, they kind of like to stash him, I feel like, for the playoffs, kind of keep him healthy. But, yeah, I mean, he's shifty. He's got a ton of experience catching balls out of the backfield. Really good option when they want to use him. And then even Clyde Edwards-Helaire is very talented in the receiving game. It's just the physical. Like, he's genuinely one of the least physically talented backs in the league, and that just hurts his overall efficiency. But they got options there. They do have Noah Gray. I will say, like, he's going to get a big opportunity here to step up, kind of show what he has to offer with Travis Kelce potentially missing this Thursday night game. He's played well when called upon, but Kelce just has never gotten hurt. Noah Gray has athletic tools. He's been a very solid tight end, too, for them. They used him a lot last year. Actually played 600 snaps for this team, so it's a big opportunity for him, and maybe could kind of make a little bit more of a name for himself here as a useful starting caliber NFL tight end potentially this season, and especially a huge opportunity with all eyes on him stepping in for Kelce in the first game of the season. So it's exciting for him. And then Blake Bell is still here, really just a blocking specialist, a 13 personnel specialist that's been around here for a while. So yeah, they rank 19th in weapons. You have one of the most dynamic, uncoverable options in the league in Travis Kelce, and then this motley crew of skill sets that they find creative ways to use. So I think 19th makes perfect sense. At the end of the day, it's pretty close to what they had last year, even if they lost Juju and Mecole Hardman. And there's plenty of reason Mahomes can elevate this group and still have one of, if not the best passing games in the league. But I want to talk a little bit more about the rushing threats here. I've got the Chiefs ranked 24th at running back. It's a solid group. Isaiah Pacheco proved a lot of people wrong. Just his physical tools are really special, and you pair that with one of the most angry, aggressive running styles in the league and put him in an offense with a ton of space to work because of how they spread things out and great run blocking. And it really is a match made in heaven. Just, because vision is and probably always will be a deficiency for him because he just wants to get to the second level as fast as possible and doesn't necessarily have that patience that you might sometimes want to see from an inside zone runner. So I guess there's your criticism on him. But it does just work here, and I think he's going to be really productive. I've been taking him in fantasy drafts. I think he's going a little bit late. especially when you factor in that they like to use him in the receiving game. So, I like him. And he's just kind of the most recent example of why you can find running backs late in the draft and why guys aren't getting paid, because you can get a really good guy with physical tools and explosiveness in Isaiah Pacheco, who quickly beats out a recent first-round pick here in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and that's really what we've seen here. Now, I still like Clyde Edwards-Helaire for what he is, and as a number 2 guy, he's nice because he's, it's kind of like Devin Singletary with what he's, I mean, Buffalo's had to use him as like a starter at times, but more like what he's going to be for Houston this year. Very similar players. Undersized, not the fastest guy by any stretch of the imagination, but because he is so low to the earth, he can get lost on inside zone runs. Linebackers can have a hard time finding him. He's got a really nice jump cut. He's physical. He's got good vision. It's just those physical tools are maybe even less than what a guy like Singletary has, and the Chiefs have very quickly kind of regretted this pick. And I'm not going to say they can't wait to get rid of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but it is kind of a blemish on this front office a little bit. He's a nice player, but ultimately a rather inconsequential running back, given how much depth there is at this position group around the league. Then you've got Jerick McKinnon. Like I said, they're not really going to use him in the run game all that much. He doesn't have like a ton to bring to the table as a runner anyway. He's much more of a passing downs weapon for them. And then as far as the quarterback getting involved in the run game here, they'll do it, maybe once every week or two, just to kind of keep defenses honest. A third down here, 3rd and 3, where they think they can get that defensive end to crash down. And Mahomes is really effective when he does run. He's got that amazing acceleration, and he can, if he really wants to break a tackle, he can. But he's pretty smart about not taking hits and stuff. But ultimately, they get a 1% boost to the run game from him. That is tied for 14th in the NFL for the QB run multiplier. But let's talk about the Hog Mollies up front. It's a really fun group, one of the best assets that this Chiefs team has. I've got them in 4th for overall offensive line ranking, 2nd in pass blocking, 6th for run blocking. I did actually recently slide the Eagles up to 1st in pass blocking. Just, I put those rankings together in May, and looking at this back after just doing the Eagles deep dive, I'm like, yeah, the Eagles should probably be a little bit ahead of the Chiefs in terms of pass blocking because their tackle duo is so much better than what the Chiefs have. I think I was potentially overlooking that a little bit 3 months ago, but just a slight correction there, nothing major. But Eagles fans will be happy to hear that. Anyway, it's a very solid group. It's a very pretty much proven group, even if they're switching tackles. Honestly, don't even need to spend a ton of time on this group, but Donovan Smith is going to be the question mark out of this group, but I think he's going to be fine. The main thing you think about it with him is he's just got to stop holding. Man, he got flagged more than any tackle in the league last year. There was a bunch of costly drive-killing holding penalties that really ultimately hurt the Bucs' season in a big way. So that's really the main question. Like, He's a big-bodied guy. He's kind of similar to Orlando Brown in a lot of ways, where his foot speed can hurt him at times, but it's been a good fit with Tom Brady, because Brady gets the ball out so quick. There's not a lot of time for these speed rushers, as fast as they may be, to get around the corner and get to the quarterback, because you can't really go through Donovan Smith. He's a really rocked-up blocker. So, he's just Orlando Brown turned down 10%. And I think it's going to work out just fine for them, even if there will probably be some frustrating moments from Donovan Smith randomly scattered throughout the season. You just got to kind of close your eyes and hope that an ugly pass rushing loss or an ugly holding call don't come at really inopportune times, which is a bit of a risk with him. But an otherwise pretty solid player. Then they have the best interior 3 starters in the league. I mean, Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith. This group is so fun to watch. And for a team that loves to run a lot of inside zone, they just, and run a lot of screens too, where they can weaponize these guys down the field. They're so fun to watch. These guys are all excellent run blockers. They all have that crazy dickhead mentality. They all are athletic with really good play strength. Especially in Creed Humphrey's case, where he is just is so freaking polished as a run blocker. It's pretty special. Just year 2 for Creed Humphrey. He's already established himself as one of the best centers in the NFL, like maybe 1 or 2 in the NFL, and really only getting better there. Creed's a good pass blocker too, so yeah, I mean, what's not to love about Creed Humphrey? The fact that they were able to get him in the 2nd round after the Packers, for some reason, took Josh Myers over him is just one of the biggest blessings this team has received. The NFC North likes to do this team favors. They took Patrick Mahomes, or they took Mitch Trubisky over Patrick Mahomes too. But yeah, I mean, you got Creed, you got Joe Tooney, who might have an argument as the best pass protecting guard in the NFL. It's a guy with tackle experience. He's one of the most technically sound offensive linemen in the entire NFL. He even has flexibility to step out and play some tackle in a pinch. They prefer him at guard because he's one of these guys that he's a great guard and a good tackle. You'd rather just keep him as a great guard just because like some of his athletic deficiencies don't necessarily translate to full efficiency at tackle, but yeah, he's awesome. And then Trey Smith's a little bit different. Trey Smith is a really plus athlete, incredible play strength. He was a highly recruited guy, someone that really had like 2nd round tape and ended up going super late because of like a heart condition. And the Chiefs take a gamble on him. It hasn't slowed him down. And he's an incredible run blocker. If there is I'm not even going to say a knock on him, but if there's room to improve, it would be as a pass protector, where sometimes his technique can betray him, but for the most part, he's continuing to get better. I think the arrow is pointing up on both him and Creed Humphrey. They're a special group, man. There's no other way to put it. And then they signed Jawaan Taylor at right tackle, and he's a good player, man. He's another guy that's gotten better every year. I think he's another guy that maybe the arrow is only pointing up on. A guy that probably should have been a 1st round pick, snuck into the early 2nd round in the draft. And, he had his deficiencies early on, but he's done an excellent job to really clean up his technique to the point that I think he's one of the more mechanically sound, at least right tackles in the NFL in terms of pass protection. Where you really want to see some gains from Jawaan Taylor is he's really frustrating to watch as a run blocker. He just falls off blocks. He'll kind of leave double teams too early or just whiff way too often. It's weird, for a guy that is so sound in pass protection. And, athleticism's not a question for him. He's listed at 330 pounds. He sure as hell does not play like it in the run game. So that's really where you want to see him figure something out. And if he does, they made a great signing there. If he doesn't, and he's a plus pass protector and a below average run blocker at $20 million, that's a lot to pay. It's not like the end of the world, but does that mean you're losing Chris Jones? Like, I think they'll figure things out with Chris Jones, but if they lose Chris Jones because they had to pay Jawaan Taylor $20 million, I think you can be a little bit critical of the move there. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. But obviously, it's a really, really nice starting 5. Not any huge weak links. You've got some knocks on a couple guys. That's natural for any offensive line. But as far as the depth is concerned, they do have Lucas Niang kind of back healthy now. He was sort of in a competition with Wiley last year, and injuries derailed his season, but he's been an interesting kind of developmental tackle, a 3rd round pick. I think there's some talent there, and if Donovan Smith really struggles, there might be some flexibility to see what Niang has to offer. Likewise with Prince Tagawanago, a guy that went a little bit too late in the draft. Definitely an athletic guy that needed to improve his technique coming out of the draft. But he's graded out okay in the starts he has had. Wanya Morris, a 3rd round pick this year, another developmental guy, a really nice, smooth athlete. Not entirely unlike what Jawaan Taylor was as a prospect. So we'll see what his development looks like, but he is probably not going to play this year. And then in terms of interior depth, it's really just Nick Allegretti, who's played a lot of games for this team, a limited athlete, but a nice backup with 3-position flexibility. You can probably lose one of these interior guys for a week or two scattered throughout the season, and Allegretti can step in and be okay for them. So again, fourth for offensive line overall, and then second in pass blocking, sixth in run blocking. And that is going to help solidify this Chiefs team as my number one offense in the NFL, the number one passing game. You know, you give the best quarterback in the NFL, some of the best pass protection in the league, the best tight end in NFL history, and a bunch of, different random playmakers that he can make work, and the best passing game play designer in the league. And, that's going to work just fine, as we've seen over the last couple years. Not just fine, that's going to win you MVPs and Super Bowls, being able to air it out like this. As far as the run game is concerned, they rank 17th. I think the Chiefs are totally happy to just be kind of middle of the road in terms of run game. They want it as an option. They want to sprinkle in the run. But they got Patrick Mahomes. They want to air it out, understandably so. And as we've seen, you can still be the best offense in the NFL with a great passing game and just a solid run game as they have again this year. Now let's transition to the defensive side of the ball. And I wish we had an answer on this Chris Jones situation. It's dragged on longer than I'm comfortable with. So we're going to have to kind of balance this conversation, because it is a dramatic difference for this defense with and without Chris Jones, as we'll see here. Let's start with the defensive line, where already you can see with Chris Jones, they rank as my 10th best pass rush, 21st in D-line run defense, 17th in D-line overall. So it's a pretty good group with Chris Jones in there, being the difference maker that he is, someone that outplayed Aaron Donald last season. I'm not prepared to say he's better than Aaron Donald, but that gap is closing. But without Chris Jones, this automatically becomes one of the worst defensive lines in the league. 30th overall for defensive line, 29th in pass rush, and 31st in D-line run defense without Chris Jones. So that right there goes to show you, this is not the equivalent of Tyreek Hill getting traded here. They don't have the surrounding pieces here to compensate for that type of loss. And for that reason, I do think they work things out with Chris Jones. Hell, I wouldn't be surprised if that gets worked out here this morning as I'm recording this video, because it is so important for them to retain Chris Jones and get him in there playing. But I understand that he wants a pay increase. He looks at the gap that Aaron Donald's contract has compared to the rest of the players at this position group. Aaron Donald's average money is $31.5 million. Chris Jones only gets 20 on average. So you can understand why he wants more money. That's a significant underpay, even if he isn't quite what Aaron Donald was in his prime when he got that contract extension. Aaron Donald is still getting paid that much money, and the gap between Chris Jones and Aaron Donald at this point is really insignificant. As a pass rusher, Chris Jones was the best interior rusher last season, and especially when you look at the way he's been able to take over playoff games, and he's a huge reason this defense has played well in January. It all just makes him so important. And, as far as like the tape and what makes him so special, he's like the perfect pass rushing DT. I mean, he's got the length, he's got the size, he maintains pretty good pad level. If there's any knock on him at all, it's pad level, but I don't even really want to go there. There are some reps against the run where he's standing up, getting moved off the ball, but there was less and less of those last year too. He was better against the run last year than he ever has been, so I'm hesitant to even call pad level a question mark in his game at this point. But he's got the technique. He can beat you with swim moves, and he's got the quickness to beat you laterally. He's got incredible power to get inside your pads and fire off the ball and blow you back. He demands a ton of double teams. He opens everything up for everybody else here, and there's just very little else to say. He's incredible. But this isn't like the Washington Commanders or the Pittsburgh Steelers or even like the Niners, where you lose one piece and you still have other guys that you trust to win one-on-one relatively consistently. They don't really have that at all. Their next best pass rusher is Charles Omenihu, who, by the way, is suspended for the first 6 games of the season. I mean, those rankings are just without Chris Jones. we could do a whole nother one where it's like without Chris Jones in the first 6 weeks of the season, without Charles Omenihu, where I think it's got to be 32nd across the board. So the Omenihu suspension is yet another reason why Chris Jones has leverage and why they got to get this thing figured out. But I do like Omenihu. They gave him about $10 million a year. I think that's about right. I mean, he's been a really effective rusher the last couple of years for San Francisco. Granted, for those that watched the Niners episode, there's a reason he went from a solid player in Houston to a really good player in San Francisco because of the way they scheme up their defensive line. And he's going to have to prove that he can do that in Kansas City in a much different system. Not that they don't run stunts and stuff, but it is just a different defensive line with a different defensive line coach. He doesn't have Chris Kachurik anymore. So, that's the one kind of thing holding you back on the Omenihu signing a little bit. But I do think he's got the tools to be kind of that good big body defensive end, very similar to how they used Carlos Dunlap last year. Going to play a lot of 5-tech, but he can also step inside and rush from the interior. Dunlap got a good 60 snaps inside the tackles last year, so you'll see some of that with Omenihu. In terms of run defense, though, I would love to see him take a step up there. He has all of the physical tools to be that kind of enforcing early downs run defender as a 5 technique. It's just got to come down to effort and discipline for him at this point. There's no physical limitations that can explain why he isn't as good of a run defender as he could be. But after him, you do have a couple of young players that you're optimistic about in George Karlaftis and Felix Anudike-Uzomah, a pair of first-round picks over the last couple of years. The one thing about both these players is neither are the most physically gifted players, and I've talked recently about the Clelin Ferrells of the world, the Derek Barnetts of the world, the Boogie Bashrams and AJ Epinezas. We've seen a lot of these guys that were high-round draft picks just not really work out because at the end of the day, pass rushing is a physical tools first position, and I do think it led to Karlaftis having a bit of a slower start last year. Now Karlaftis, just like a Derek Barnett or just like a Clelin Ferrell or Boogie Basham, it's not a matter of is he a bad player. He's a high effort, solid technique guy. Want to see more play strength against the run there with him. But in terms of dominating with consistency relative to the great edge rushers in the league, we got a ways to go before we feel that way about George Karlaftis. And he's the guy I'm next optimistic about after Chris Jones and Charles Omenihu. I liked him coming out, but he's got to show that he's even a number 2, let alone a number 1. And then you got Felix Anudike-Uzomah, and it is tough. His play style reminds me a lot of a guy like Shaq Barrett. So I never want to say guys like Karlaftis and Anudike-Uzomah who maybe don't have the typical first round edge rush physical traits. You never want to say they can't become good players because there are outliers, right? There are guys like Shaq Barrett that just find perfect technique and discipline and instincts and become a low end number 1 pass rusher as Barrett has. There's a world where that happens with Anudike-Uzomah, but he's a guy that just kind of checked a lot of boxes, but nothing really stood out like he's got that one go-to trait where he will just kick your ass every time if you let him. And he's also not listed as a starter right now. They've got Mike Dana in there as a starter. They like his consistency as another guy that checks a lot of boxes, does a lot of nice stuff, has carved out a nice role as a rotational piece for them last year and really since he's been here. And you feel pretty good about what Dana's going to give you across the board and kind of what he is. But you just don't know really at this point with Karlaftis and Anudike-Uzomah. There's a world where this is a really good edge duo where, if both Karlaftis and Anudike-Uzomah can reach essentially their upside. Again, anyone can theoretically become Shaq Barrett, but in reality, Karlaftis, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, if these guys can become sort of Preston Smith level number 2s and you retain Chris Jones, this D-line's in business. And then you have Charles Omenihu, who's another complementary piece. This defensive line's in business, and they could get to January and kick some ass. So I don't want it to be all doom and gloom. But the whole Chris Jones holdout just kind of paints a cloud over this whole thing. But in reality, I think they probably keep Chris Jones. I think Karlaftis has a nice year. And Aduke Uzama, I'm a little bit more 1 foot in, 1 foot out in terms of year one impact. But, you get Chris Jones back, you get Omenihu back, you get Karlaftis to continue to develop. I don't want to paint this as this horrible defensive line. Again, I have them as the 10th best pass rush in the NFL with Chris Jones in there. Now, another big reason that losing Chris Jones would hurt so much is this interior defensive line is borderline pathetic outside of Chris Jones. I mean, granted, Omenihu will play a lot of 3-tech and 4-eye on pass rush downs, so he's kind of a part interior, part edge piece. But after Jones, I mean, Derek Nottie has somehow gotten worse every year. A 38 PFF run defense grade, and throughout this series I've talked about how you want to take that run defense grade with a grain of salt, because a lot of the times these guys are asked to play nose tackle and 2-gap, and it's just very difficult to collect wins as a run defender in those assignments. But with Derek Nottie, that's just not the case. He only played about 50 snaps as an actual nose tackle. So he doesn't get the same excuse that a guy like maybe Vita Vea or Grover Stewart get there. But, dude, he had 7 defensive stops last year. Those are tackles that constitute a failure. So, it's kind of a compensation for TFLs in a lot of way where, the expecting a defensive tackle to make a TFL is unreasonable. But, you get off a block and make a play and it's only a 3-yard rush. Yeah, that's a good defensive stop by a defensive tackle. He only had 7 of those on the season. So I hate to question a guy's work ethic and effort on the field, but where you at, Derek Nottie? I mean, he's been a good defensive tackle in the past, especially against the run, but it has not been, especially last year. And the year before that, there were signs of regression. So I don't know what the hell is going on with Derek Nottie, but they need something from him this year. You also have Tashawn Wharton, who I think in a best case scenario won't have to play much this year. I think they see Charles Omenihu as a juiced up version of how they like to use Wharton. He's an undersized kind of pass rushing specialist of a defensive tackle, but he's a solid player, and he's going to be just fine in that role until Omenihu gets back, kind of stepping in on third downs and giving them a little bit of juice on the inside there. So he's nice depth to have. Especially considering Omenihu's suspension. And then you've got a couple other more nose tackle types, really unproven talent, though. Keandre Coburn out of Texas, liked the pick, but again, unproven. And then Neil Farrell, a guy I really liked for the Raiders, and they ended up trading him interdivision. So, obviously something's missing there, but I do think the talent's there. But man, Chris Jones is the only guy you can trust to be an impact against the run, other than maybe Mike Dana off the edge. So, just in both phases, Chris Jones is so critical for this group. We did gloss over the edge depth. Malik Herring, don't expect him to play a whole lot. And then BJ Thompson, likewise, was a total developmental draft pick. He's like a 2 or 3 year project, but a really athletic guy. But he's built like a wide receiver right now. He's got to put on some play strength. But obviously a polarizing group. They can be a above average defensive line, especially in pass rush, if and when Chris Jones is in there. But to start the year without Jones and Omenihu genuinely might be the worst defensive line in the NFL. So that's pretty polarizing. And I think regardless, they're going to have some weeks where they're a little bit softer against the run. Though I will say, to their credit, I thought that'd be an issue in the Super Bowl, and these guys managed to step up and make it work. I don't know if that's a credit to coaching or what, but they got to, the season on the whole, there's going to be some question marks there. But let's talk about the linebackers. Really fun linebacker group. There's 3 or 4 guys, even 5 guys I really like in this room. Nick Bolton has been one of the more surprising player successes in terms of who I felt he was as a draft prospect. I thought he'd be a solid player, a good run defender, and kind of an iffy coverage player. And he's been a dominant run defender and a pretty solid coverage player who's only getting better each year. And trending towards being one of the 5 best linebackers in the NFL. And it's, what he has is all in his brain, really. I mean, he sees the game so well in both phases. Even if he's not the fastest guy, he's not the biggest guy, he's not the quickest guy. He's a step ahead. He plays incredibly physical as well. He takes on blocks. He hits hard. He's kind of the heart and soul of this defense in so many ways. Really good, even underrated player at times right now. Want to give him his credit, and he's a big reason why the Chiefs rank 3rd in linebacker run defense. Really is one of the best run defending linebackers in the league, and it even compensates for his running mate maybe being the complete opposite and not being much of a run defender at all in Willie Gay. And God, if you could put Nick Bolton in Willie Gay's body, you've got, I don't know, the best linebacker in the history of the NFL, like a more athletic Ray Lewis. I don't know. Willie Gay is one of the freakiest athletes in the NFL, and it helps him make plays. His sideline to sideline speed is awesome, and he's a risk taker. He likes to read the quarterback's eyes. He likes to jump routes, and it leads to kind of a boom or bust coverage output, which is fine because Bolton is so disciplined next to him. But in terms of run defense, he's out of position. He misses tackles. It hurts his overall game, but ultimately I think he's a fun complement to a guy like Nick Bolton. Is, though, heading into the last year of his deal, and I believe that they are prepared to get Leo Chenal ready to be their number 2. And when that happens, and that might even happen this year, by the way, but when that happens, this has a chance to be... God, the Niners are just so freaking good at linebacker, but I would say this has a chance to be the 2nd best linebacker room in the NFL, even ahead of the Ravens, because I think Leo Chenal's upside is insane. Was my number 1 linebacker in last year's draft. Cannot explain how he fell to the 3rd round. He might be a little bit stiff in terms of fluid movement skills, but that's like the one real knock on him, that and that he wasn't used too much in coverage at Wisconsin and still needs to learn that aspect of the game. But he's got a throwback mentality. He loves to play the run, was really efficient at it at Wisconsin, has insane straight line speed. He's got legit 4.5 speed. He's an excellent pass rusher as well as a blitzer. He's still really young. And when he got on the field late last season, he was a legitimate impact. I mean, we just mentioned how they were good against the run against the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Leo Chenal had his best game in that Super Bowl. And God, I don't want to say I don't think they win the Super Bowl without Leo Chenal. That might be a little bit excessive. But I don't know, Chiefs fans, it's not crazy. Like, we thought the Chiefs were going to get obliterated against the run, against the Eagles, and Leo Chenal said, no, you're not. So I'm really excited for his future. I don't know how much he plays this year outside of those base defensive looks, but it might even be a case where on earlier downs, Leo Chenal is the starter, and then on 3rd downs, it's Willie Gay. And then maybe over the course of the season, they just say, you know what, screw it. Let's just roll with Chenal. So at some point, this is going to be a Bolton-Chenal linebacker duo. But I think Willie Gay is good enough to kind of hold that off for now, at least in coverage. And everything we just said about Chenal being here makes it a little bit complicated why they felt the need to bring in Drew Tranquill. Like, they kind of have a little bit of everything here. I would be kind of frustrated as a Chiefs fan if Tranquill took snaps away from Leo Chenal, because I think Chenal is already a better run defender than Drew Tranquill is shown to be. And it's not like Tranquill is some incredibly high upside coverage player either. He's a good vet. I thought someone should have signed Drew Tranquill as a starter. I thought it was interesting that he kind of jumped on this opportunity so quick, because it's not much of an opportunity. But he is some of the best linebacker depth in the league. If anything happens to Nick Bolton, then you need more of a proven field general in the middle of the defense. And then Jack Cochrane makes the team. I actually don't know anything about him, but Cam Jones was an undrafted free agent that made this team. Cam Jones was my number 11 linebacker in this draft. Ultra instinctive player. I thought he was definitely a draftable, like 4th or 5th round guy. So I love the pickup. Not a lot of opportunities here, but as special teams depth and deep long-term developmental linebacker play. Like I like Cam Jones, so keep an eye on him deep down the road, I suppose. But yeah, really fun linebacker group. They rank 9th for overall linebacker. But if Nick Bolton continues to get better to the point where he's one of the 2 or 3 best linebackers in the league, and then Leo Chanel gets out there and he looks great, this someday could be easily a top 5 linebacker duo within the next couple of years at some point. But it might be just another year until we get there. Then we get to the secondary. I like this secondary. They do have some question marks. They have a lot of young talent here that just needs to prove themselves. I've got them ranked 15th. And, you've got a really good cornerback trio that could become a great cornerback trio. You got L'Jarius Sneed, who's just one of my favorite corners in the league. He's actually someone that made more of a conversion from safety to corner, kind of Byron Jones-esque there. But incredible 4.3 speed. The former experience as a safety in college shows in his physicality when they play him in the slot, his tackling ability when he blitzes. They like him as their slot corner. He's not necessarily their designated slot, though. They'll stick him outside and use someone like Trent McDuffie in the slot at times. But yeah, I think you could argue that the arrow is even pointing up for L'Jarius Sneed heading into a contract year, by the way. They're already running into money issues with Chris Jones. It would be a shame if they had to lose L'Jarius Sneed, but that's why this window with this group is really nice right now, because he's a true number one, even one of the more underrated corners in the league. Really physical and press man coverage too, which they like to run here. So he's just an all-around great fit. And then Trent McDuffie, first-round pick last year. I felt like this was a steal when they moved up to get him. I thought he was a top 20 player in last year's draft. So technically sound, so smooth as an athlete. He's physical in press man coverage. He's brilliant in zone coverage. And that all showed out last year once he got on the field. Started the year hurt, but by season's end, he was a really good, if not great, number 2 corner. Definitely the arrow pointing up. It's just a smaller sample size. He just needs to continue to prove it. But, there's definitely an argument that Sneed and McDuffie is a top 10 cornerback duo already in the NFL. And then you got Jalen Watson as your number 3 corner. And it is a 7th-round pick out of Washington State last year. But with the way he finished the season last year and kind of winning this starting job in camp, he rotated a ton last year with Joshua Williams, who was a pleasant surprise himself. But I think he's kind of pulled away here and has a chance to. I don't necessarily want to say breakout, because I don't know that he's got like crazy upside or going to be this dominant, L'Jarius like Sneed replacement or anything like that. I'm not saying that couldn't happen, but not necessarily expecting it. But breakout in the sense that he can establish himself as a quality starter here for the Chiefs. And yeah, I mean, he finished the season really strong. Playoff run was awesome. He's another kind of big, lengthy press corner on the outside. Really going to challenge you down the field and make it difficult on you to complete deep passes against him. So you're optimistic for what you saw there. And then you have Joshua Williams, who's very similar for a lot of different ways. Rookie last year, day 3 pick, physical dude. Had some ups and downs in terms of consistency, just as you would expect. They've got a type there. They threw a couple dart throws and, for the most part, hit on both these guys. And I think they feel very good about the cornerback depth there between those two guys. But they feel even better after drafting Nick Jones in the 7th round, who's a good balanced player, like the pick. More of a slot option as well, because, if anything happened to, both McDuffie and Sneed can play the slot, so I don't want to necessarily say that, but Nick Jones does provide a little bit more fluidity and ability to step inside and play the slot, as opposed to Watson and Williams, who are much more just those bump and run perimeter corners. But they also poach Darius Rush from the Colts, who I'm surprised he didn't make the team. Like, as bad as his camp might have been, Rush was a super athletic 5th round pick who's still relatively new to the position. And the Colts have one of the worst secondaries in the league, so I was really surprised he didn't make the team. And not surprised to see the Chiefs pick him up, because Rush is kind of similar to the dart throws they've made on guys like L'Jarius Sneed and Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams and Charvarius Ward, where just give us the 6-foot tall, fast guy that loves to get in your face and play man coverage. We'll coach up the rest of it. And I don't know how much he's going to play this year, but it is kind of similar to them getting Charvarius Ward off of the Cowboys practice squad, or when the Cowboys cut him, or for a 7th-round pick, or whatever it was. They got Charvarius Ward for nothing. Can totally see a world where in this system it works out for them. So love that pickup. I think this is a really good, even underrated cornerback room. Now, the safety group, I love Justin Reed. He's just a complete, balanced, overall safety. Can do a little bit of everything, go free safety. He's got slot corner experience to run quarters or come down towards the box and man up slot receivers and safeties. He's okay against the run. Kind of streaky there. Not the biggest guy, not the most consistent tackler, but not too worried about it. Didn't necessarily have the breakout year to be the Tyrann Mathieu replacement that I may have hyped him up as last year, but did at least back it up with a good year and proved to be a good signing. But safety number 2 is going to be interesting. They're leaning on Brian Cook to be that guy, and I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit skeptical there. He's just not fast. I worry about his coverage consistency. I didn't love his coverage consistency going back to I didn't love his coverage consistency going back to Cincinnati. It's a little bit of a tongue twister. But he is really physical. He's a smart player. I think as long as his head can stay ahead of the game a little bit, and I think there's a chance that it can, I don't think he'll be a liability in coverage, but he is genuinely one of the least athletic starting safeties in the NFL in a system that can at times expose him. You know, they like to rotate their safeties. They like to be versatile here. They will occasionally have him in 2 shells and even free safety at times, and they will ask him to man up slot receivers and tight ends. And, we saw what that did to hurt this defense with a guy like Daniel Sorensen a year ago. I'm a little worried that you're going to get some games like that from Brian Cook. We'll see. Now, they do have Mike Edwards, who gets to kind of slot back into that more dime safety role where he was awesome for Tampa. He was so awesome as a dime safety and kind of a aggressive playmaker in that dime safety role where he's playing a lot of buzz zones and situations where he can just be aggressive and it won't compromise the whole coverage at large. He was so good in that role that Tampa thought they could let Jordan Whitehead go and Mike Edwards would step up as a starter and be a good player. And it didn't happen. He was not a consistent coverage player as a 3-down guy. His run defense is a problem on an early down basis. And I think Kansas City knows that. It's why he's not starting. But I've always kind of liked the idea of a really aggressive playmaking type of safety as a dime back. And I think he can be that for them here. And then Shamari Connor, they take him in the 4th round. I did think that was rich, but it did make sense. He's kind of similar to what like Juan Thornhill was coming out, a guy that played a lot of that kind of slot corner hybrid safety stuff, similar size and athleticism. 2 guys like Justin Reed and Juan Thornhill. So in terms of scheme fit, I think they like a lot of the stuff he does, just not as much of a proven prospect. But 4th round is not insignificant, and we might at some point see what he can do. But yeah, really solid secondary. They rank right in the middle of the league there, 15th, with just some questions about really safety number 2 and potentially cornerback 3. If Watson and Josh Williams take a little bit of a step back from what they were last year, but not necessarily expecting that. But, they are year 2, day 3 corners. There's a chance for that, especially if the pass rush isn't as good up front and these guys have to cover a little bit longer. But that wraps up the defense, and this is another situation where we need to break this down with and without Chris Jones. With Chris Jones, I've got this as the 10th best defense in the NFL. I'm not trying to paint this as a pessimistic outlook, but it is so important that they get him back because without Chris Jones, they ranked as the 20th overall defense, but 23rd in pass defense and 27th in run defense. Those obviously are not ideal places to be. And I really feel like he is the engine of this entire defense. And for that reason, I think they're going to work this thing out and get him back in the building, maybe even as early as by the time this video drops and for the Thursday night opener. But it's not just the defensive rankings changing there. They would actually drop down to my third overall team if there's a world where Chris Jones gets traded or doesn't play this year. But of course, with him, they are my number one ranked team, because you put this offense that ranks as my number one offense in the league with a top 10 or so defense that's pretty balanced, and the defending Super Bowl champs with a great special teams here, by the way, with a great kicker, a great punter. This group's going to do some work. And, last year I ranked them 2 and people said that was too high. This year I rank them number 1 after they win the Super Bowl, and I've seen people saying they're too high. Like, Patrick Mahomes is that dude. Andy Reid is that dude. And as long as he's got a solid team around him, if not a good to great team around him, this team deserves to be the Super Bowl favorites and the number 1 ranked team, which is exactly where they are, both in this series and in the market. Like I said, they're still 5-point favorites against Detroit without Kelsey and probably Chris Jones. Like, that tells you everything you need to know. And they're probably still going to win, by the way. But to recap their strengths and weaknesses and looking at the schedule before we get out of here for the last time, strengths, really it just comes down to quarterback, offensive line, and coaching. I think there is a world, though, where either or the secondary or the pass rush becomes strengths, but there is some unproven talent in both the D-line and the secondary before I can confirm that it's a strength, but they are interesting groups. As far as weaknesses, it's really just wide receiver for those reasons we documented, but that's even compensated by Travis Kelce's existence, being in part a wide receiver, and the fact that they're really good at just taking specific skill sets and pinpointing them in the right position to succeed and elevating them with play calling and Patrick Mahomes. And then the other weakness would be if there is no Chris Jones, that makes this defensive line a weakness for this team. And in this AFC, that would definitely lead them to run into some trouble. But we've beaten the Chris Jones thing into the dirt at this point. Let's take a quick look at their schedule. I'm going to be dropping my official record predictions tomorrow, so I don't want to spend too much time on this because this is more of just a projection. But they're going to be favored in pretty much every game they play. The only game I have them not as a favorite is at the New York Jets, week 4. But even then, they might be like 1-point favorites. But yeah, they're the number 1 team in the league. Them being great is much more about them executing and health than it is, how hard is their schedule or making excuses elsewhere, right? It's all about the Kansas City Chiefs getting the job done here. Now, statistically speaking, analytically speaking, it's just really difficult to say that any team can get to 12 wins in the AFC. There's so many difficult games on the schedule, and that's why my formula has them coming out just under there at 11 wins, basically. Not that I would bet that. I'm not betting against the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes. I think that's just a fool's bet. But technically speaking, the value is on the under there. But I'm like I said, I'm going to have my full season predictions video tomorrow where I go through every team's schedule, kind of put my foot down, how many games I think each team ultimately wins. This segment in general, give me a little bit of feedback for those that have followed this series. I'm considering just scrapping this segment. I tried scrapping it last year. Some of you guys didn't like it. I don't know how much this segment truly adds to the series. I'm genuinely curious what you guys think. As I already am thinking towards next year, would love for you guys to give me that feedback. But anyway, we are done. We made it through this series. 32 teams. Had to be, I haven't added it up, but it has to be 40 hours of content. I hope you guys have enjoyed. It's been a ride, but we're just getting started, man. The season's here. I can't wait. Hope you guys enjoy the Thursday opener, but we'll see you again tomorrow for that big predictions show. Thank you so much for watching. Please hit that like button on the way out, and we'll see you soon. Peace out.